start with 1400. Let's start. So anybody from the 1400s, you have one of those events in your group, come up and present. Or actually, you can go back to the timeline and present from there. Oh, completed. Okay.
So you only want us to, when you say our events, you're specifically talking about the one that we chose.
Yes.
Sharing, right?
Yeah.
Not all of them.
Right. And we'll put up, during lunch, we'll put up the rest of the other events that you have in your envelope. But for right now, it's just the one.
You can present from your seat, and then we can put it up later, all the events later up after.
Yeah. That is also an option.
I got 1680 before that.
1400? Somebody's got some 1400.
There's only one date from the 1400s,
Okay.
and they didn't choose to present it, so.
All right, so who has the earliest? What was yours?
1680.
Anybody have anything earlier from that? Your one event? No? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, 1680. South Carolina passes a law that allows any white person to capture and punish a runaway slave. In 1690, a law was passed that required whites to act in this role. Slavery and white supremacy were so fully institutionalized in the American South that, as one author put it, white supremacy served in lieu of a police force.
And do you want to say why you picked that?
We picked it because it seemed to us that this was sort of like the birth of the joining between cops and racism, and maybe that it's always been that way.
Thanks. Next one, 1680, 1690, 1700s.
We have 1700s and onwards.
Okay.
1703. Yours is on.
Ours is onwards. Very similar. Southern cities such as Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, and Mobile form paramilitary groups tasked with the control of enslaved people, with the goal of preventing and repressing rebellion. Slave patrols and militias often work together. In the U.S., these organized patrols are the first proper antecedents to modern police forces.
So I don't know if we have the book here, but there's several books about the birth of slave patrols and how they eventually got uniforms and how they eventually started becoming police. So like our police force, just historically, like that's where that comes from. You're protecting property, and enslaved people were property. They weren't really protecting them, but there's deep historical connection to our police force and slave patrols, and obviously horrible racism. So why did you pick it? Because
Well, it's just, there's that feeling of, the root of something. I want to dig something out of the root, and it seems like this is getting there.
Next one.
Really similar vein, but also maybe moving out of the South, definitely moving out of the South. 1703, Boston passes a curfew law for all blacks and indigenous people, establishing race as the defining criteria in law enforcement in the new colonies, even non-slavery ones.
Wow. Gainesville had curfews too. Miami had curfews where, all the way up into the 70s, like if you were a domestic worker, you had to be off Miami Beach by the time the sun went down. And so these curfews started, slavery days, and they kept on for a very, very long time. And now when you think about it, why are you in this neighborhood? Black people getting pulled over. Why are you in this neighborhood? Why are you driving a nice car? Why are you here? You don't belong here. So it's like, you see it, And why'd you?
Similar vein of thinking is just like trying to hit a root, and what was going on. And I thought it was interesting that it was in Boston. I know a lot of Southern history around this, but I don't know a lot of Northeastern.
Before we move on to, if we're having a hard time hearing people, one thing we can do is this, point up, which means raise your voice. Sorry, we didn't say that earlier.
Okay, anything after 1703, maybe before 1800?
Yeah, 1790.
Okay, anything before that? No? Okay.
Alright. Naturalization Act reserves adopted citizenship for whites only. Without citizenship, non-whites can't vote, own property, bring suit, or testify in court. All basic protections and privileges that whites take for granted.
So, what was the discussion around that?
So the discussion around this centered around the state-backed dehumanization in any way, shape, or form of people of color. And we also branched that out to a general pattern through history of how that gets brought to bear on women and on non-gender conforming peoples and for the LGBT general community, etc. throughout time. But more specifically, and germane to this conversation, talk about how it was one more step to dehumanize and justify slavery, and take that much more power away and dehumanize black people.
So I'm just gonna, because I'm like a history buff, right? So all these things, I'm like, hey, I know this and that and whatever. So we have this separation, and there's always been in law. But the first example of a black person being put in lifelong servitude, well, because everybody was indentured servant at first. First Africans come in 1619, but the first example of somebody being put into lifelong servitude, his name is John Punch. I don't remember the year; it might have been like 1641. But he escaped with 2 white indentured servants, and they got caught. And what happened was the 2 white indentured servants got put on an additional 7 years to their servitude, and John Punch got put into slavery for life. So that's the first example of like lifelong servitude, and it was because we worked together, so we're going to separate you. So it's we've always created that division, and then it starts getting put into law, right? There's a precedent here. We're going to keep you separated. You're always going to bear the brunt of like the worst of the punishment. And so that precedent is set. So right, that's what I think about here, where whites get all the rights and everybody else is just stuck. And just a point for intersectionality, there are also black LGBTQ and non-gender conforming people. So, I mean, they got that too. Okay, next event.
I have 1921.
Oh,
You're in 1850.
1865, what was yours?
1850.
Yeah.
Congress passes the Fugitive Slave Law, allowing federal marshals to capture runaway slaves and enlist the assistance of other whites. Also makes it possible for a black person to be captured as a slave solely on the sworn statement of a white person with no right to challenge the claim in court.
Right. So,
So our group concluded that this was kind of a good example of how white people set up laws so that other white people in their society would be complicit with the whole status quo of how the white supremacy thing. So even if people themselves weren't keeping slaves themselves or anything like that, it still made it so that they felt like, well, the law says I should do this, so with no other thoughts about it, they would just comply with that.
and so, like,
Exactly, I agree with you.
poor white people and poor black people have a lot in common, right? But with laws like these, you get the poor whites to think less on a class rate, a class line, and more on a race line. So it's like, well, the big guy, he's including me in this law enforcement. He's giving me a job. He's recruiting me for something important, right? And then you also set up where white word is way more important than the black word. Any person off the street could have turned in a black person, and there were free people of color. Like, there were free black people all over the country. I mean, not so much. It was not so common in the South, but like Virginia and up, there were a lot of free people of color. So it wasn't that the thing with 12 Years? I refuse to watch 12 Years a Slave, but wasn't that a thing? Like, he was a free person of color and gets right. So you just this is all precedent. It's all precedent, and like I think this is making things very obvious today. So you could have been free and gotten turned in. Also, there was incentives for judges to bring people, like runaway slaves that got turned in. They got like $10 or something for every person that they like turned in for slaves. So people that were on slave patrols and judges both got paid to incentivize like enslaving people or keeping them enslaved.
Well, prosecutors now get credit for every conviction, regardless of whether the person's guilty or innocent. So that's a very
Continuity.
example of this thing.
Police have quotas for how many people they arrest. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially in Baltimore and Lonnie, they had
Yeah?
Waldo and Lottie.
Yeah, Waldo and Lottie down Waldo Road. Lottie, their police force got disbanded, right? Because they were right. Their police force got disbanded because they were trying to meet quotas and they were pulling a whole bunch of people over and right. So they just Lottie by. Let's disband all of them. Now, next one. There was 17.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I have 1865, which is a pretty big year. Emancipation of enslaved people. Emancipation is followed, however, immediately by passage of laws controlling black people's public movement and work. Emancipation also stipulates that slave labor may continue for those convicted of a crime, creating an incentive for whites in power to arrest black people in order to exploit their labor and prevent their entry into wage labor and political power. So that was a heavy one. Well, we talked about this in relation directly to the criminalization of black bodies and how it went from slavery not to freedom, not to liberation, it went from slavery to control. And we talked about how it became okay. Maybe it was not okay under the law to enslave people based on the color of their skin and take away their rights, but it was okay to label them a criminal and do so. And so again, like that lineal connection to today's criminal justice system, I guess, is what we got out of this. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, well, we were also I mean, my takeaway too is just that black people weren't free and still aren't in this way of just language has shifted and what it looks like has shifted, but it's like the same shit. Different story.
And after emancipation is when you start seeing vagrancy laws, right? So you get a bunch of recently freed enslaved folks that now don't have jobs, are being exploited still in a very serious way. So we're having vagrancy laws. So then, okay, 13th Amendment, everybody but criminal records. So you're saying, like, it was a setup. You know, okay, yeah, we freed you, but if you do anything wrong, and we're making new laws so that the things that you do are wrong. We're putting you on the fucking chain gang. So, criminalization at its core, right? There was somebody in New Jersey, in Ocala, I think they're trying to ban, like, sagging pants or something. So it's just like,
I got rid of that law.
Okay. So yeah, all right. So that was 1865. What's next?
Yeah, I heard y'all had 1921. Yeah, with 1921.
No. Okay.
Okay, so 1921 to 22, the United States House of Representatives and the Senate debated the Dyer Bill, an anti-lynching bill. This bill provided fines and imprisonment for persons convicted of lynching. The Dyer Bill passed in the House of Representatives, but it was killed in the Senate by filibustering Southerners who claimed that it was unconstitutional and an infringement upon states' rights. Okay, this probably sounds familiar. So we picked this because we had other ones too. You gave us a lot. Okay.
Well, that
So-
means you want to.
No.
You want to do another one?
Huh?
Do you want to do another one?
Well, we picked this one because most of us had not heard of this particular bill, and that shows that we are not taught this history in the United States of our true history of this country. And one person had heard of this movement, but not, we all knew of the anti-lynching movement, but this person had not heard this particular bill. So we learned something. And then the other thing is that, it shows this deep arc of history, right? So the anti-lynching movement and the movement to, again, for the liberation of black people in this country in particular, has deep roots and has been going on. Everybody thinks the civil rights movement started in the 50s in this country and nothing happened before that. So this, and there's probably deeper history than this. So so it showed this history, and that, we all thought that those were significant. So that was why we picked it.
Did you want to do one more?
Yeah, can we sneak in one? Okay.
I also was thinking in terms of the states' rights issue with like the right to lynch, it makes me think of Stand Your Ground.
I mean, in the whole, Civil War, there's states' rights to own slaves. Okay, yeah, go
I just-
speak one in. Oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
just want to say though, it's 104 and in the
Okay.
interest
Yeah.
of, I know people are probably getting hungry and we don't want to hold you late today in the afternoon, so maybe we should keep on moving and just make sure to take a look at the timeline once it's all up there.
Okay, never mind. Next one.
I think we're probably next. We have
Okay.
1943 Detroit riots. Is there one before that?
Good.
Okay, 1943 Detroit riots. Arrests of several black people after a skirmish and a rape accusation leads to days of white rioting against black people met with black rioting against whites. According to Thurgood Marshall, the police used persuasion rather than firm action with white rioters, while against Negroes they used the ultimate in force, nightsticks, revolvers, riot guns, submachine guns, and tear guns.
So, what do you think that means now?
So there are the two reasons we chose this. One of them, which is pretty obvious, is like the treatment of black rioters versus like white people who burn stuff because of sports. And but the other thing actually that this brought up, just in terms of like out, comfort zones and things like that, is because it mentioned the rape accusation. I think one of the most uncomfortable things for me personally to grapple with as a white feminist is the real history of false rape accusations as a tool of political power in this country, because I think we spend so much of our effort in the feminist movement today sort of debunking the myth of women just crying rape to get back at men. And so grappling with the fact that there was a very real racialized history of that is probably the most uncomfortable part of our racial history for me personally to deal with.
Right. Emmett Till
Yeah.
whistled at somebody. Rosewood, white woman, accusing a black man of rape, and he was like, passing traveler. Like,
Yeah.
cities have been burned to the ground over things like that. And it is very, very, very uncomfortable. Yeah, Carol.
No, I just want to hear you.
Oh, was that? So it is very fun. It's not something like, there's statistics now, like women typically, it's not a thing that happens. Like it's not a thing that happens often anyway, but you look at the history and it's just like the fetishization of black men as these like big beasts and insatiable sexual appetites, and like that shit got cities burned to the ground.
Yeah, and anybody mentioned the Scottsboro boy incident?
Oh, right.
I mean, that was hideous.
Scottsboro
Boys.
nine? How many of them were
There were
they?
8 or 9 of them.
It was
and-
Alabama.
Yeah.
You wanna?
Well, back in the 20s or 30s, there were, people were going across the country in freight trains, hoboing. And there were these young black men on this train. And it was 1 or 2 white women got on as well because they were poor and dispossessed and they were on the train. And I guess, I don't know what happened, but when they were all discovered, the black fellas were arrested and they were charged with rape, and the trial went on for years. It was a really big, divisive program in this country, and the Communist Party became very involved in this. It was one of their big organizing issues, and put this issue of rape against white women by black men out there. But the women eventually, I think, came clear that that nothing happened, that they didn't rape them. So whether they
And they were all teenagers, by the way, and they got a pardon just last year. And this happened in like
in the 20s or 30s.
right. Yes.
Yes, but how do you deal with it when the reality of such matters that you have any man, for that matter, and especially men of color, who are in error? A well case that would have been about 3 years or so ago, where you had a firefighter who was a family man, had a newborn at home, but he was out in Jacksonville, Florida, enjoying himself on Saturday evening, and then as the morning came him on Sunday. He's downtown Jacksonville, Florida, and apparently he, in his mind, decided to sexually assault and batter a woman, and was charged with sexual assault and attempted murder. And he was raised in a very prominent religious organization, the Potter's House, and many of the people that raised him were very respected in the community. Matter of fact, his dad is a member of Baghdad. But as many of you know of, State Attorney Angela Corey convicted him on all charges, and he's spending life right now and lost his career as a firefighter and everything. So how do we deal with the reality of something like that that has truth? Therefore, it is used in a manner to bring about even more of an oppression or false imprisonment of youth. For example, where I live in Baker County.
Hold on, we're gonna
get responses to 1 minute.
So just to say that, like, that's a matter of like restorative, restorative justice and prison industrial complex. Like, if that was not true, then, and you know, Angela Corey, we could talk about her all day. But you know, as an individual, like, that's. Are you saying that it wasn't true, or that?
No, I'm saying it is true, and how they will use that to further oppress or falsely institutionalize through investigation, try and convict the youth. Like in Baker County, where I live, there's numerous of cases of young youth being accused of such, and they're being put through the court system and convicted on such matters.
And that's prison. It feels like the epitome of prison industrial complex, and I would like to have that conversation with you later. But that is still something very much that goes on. And now we're in a place where it's like, well, shit, like how, you know, feminism is a thing, and we want to defend women who have been assaulted. So that is. I mean, at this point, like, all I can think of was, shit, I hope, like, they have good lawyers, but you know that they don't. So, I mean, in restorative justice, like, if you've done it, like, there needs to be, like, somewhere for you to know that you fucked up. There needs to be somewhere for you to learn. I don't know.
I think that's a whole
heavy.
different conversation.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Running out of time. And I was just going to add, though, that that's a good example of the way media runs with, you know, cases.
Media does run with those cases.
You know, and runs these whole smear.
You
are hungry. Like turning that person into the stereotype of the black roots. Whereas when a white man, you know, perpetrates the same crime,
you cannot press charges.
A very different.
You can't get anything done.
But I think
never another evidence.
Okay, so there's one or two more, and try to limit side comments because we need to get through and have lunch.
Right. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I get these things suck me in.
There's so much to say. Yeah.
Right. All right. So who has the next one? That was 1943, I think. Anything after that?
Oh, I have 1950.
Okay.
1950, the emergence of the civil rights movement as we know it, which uses civil disobedience strategically in national campaigns. Nonviolent protesters, most of them black, are routinely met with violence.
So, why? Why'd you pick that? I mean, I think it's obvious. But
I believe we picked that one because it's something that's currently within the minds of the Commonwealth of this nation as well as many nations, because this is the anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Movement.
And, you know, Black Lives Matter. What's the next one? Last one? I think there was one more. Chelsea?
Yes. We have two together. I'm going to read you a
They're really
paired them.
relevant to each other.
Okay.
The first one is 1992, Rodney King verdict in LA riots. Rioting began in the streets of LA after the police implicated in the Rodney King beating were acquitted despite the existence of a video shown many times on national TV.
And yours, Chelsea?
And we paired that with 2014. On August 9th, Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri, is shot and killed by white police officer Darren Wilson. The shooting prompts protests locally and nationally led by black youth and black-led organizations. On November 24th, a grand jury chooses not to indict Darren Wilson, sparking another wave of protests around the world. So we paired those because we thought it was interesting. There's, I think, a 14-year difference between the two. We were looking at the difference between this incident in the 90s that would also, there was video of the Rodney King beating, and there's video of, not of Michael Brown, but of, some of the more recent, like, police lynchings, and, right, exactly. And so we were talking about the difference between reactions between the two, and also kind of, a lot of us are in this room today because of this one, because it's happened, right now in our adult lives, and had such an obvious impact on us and sparked such a movement that we're all participating in at this moment.
And also like how this was like probably one of the first times it was like shown on national television in the Rodney King case, and like how much that has evolved with like technology and how much easier it is for people to see.
We had Oscar Grant, and we also had the Watts riots. Now, and the point we have, just really quickly, is that why are these, I lived in Miami when Liberty City happened, so why are these things called riots? And now why, and I think the movement now has done a tremendous job, really, in changing the dialogue and the consciousness, and this is now an uprising, right? So Black Lives Matter has turned into an uprising, which is a movement of people for their liberation. But it has always been that. But Detroit, right? But since Detroit, it's been defined as a riot, which is the state turning this, because a riot is punishable, right? This is, again, the point that you were making, that the state, ever since these anti-lynching mobs, which are, then turned into the police, the police then are then allowed to arrest people, private citizens are allowed to arrest black people, and then the police, those private citizens are turned into the police force, and now the police force, now we have rioting, which is then police are allowed to then arrest people, and then arrest black people in this country and imprison them for something that, is, basically state-sanctioned, conduct that is supposedly legal, but those that are in powers that be, who are the whites that are controlling it, have made it illegal. So we just wanted to make that point because it ties in with what we had too.
No, if people want to read it later, we also have to make teenage race riot.
Also, just to put out there that I divided up the groups, the different segments, and when you said you had a bunch of heavy things, just to let you know that with 10 groups, we had enough police murders of black men to go one in every group, I think, and there was almost enough individual riot stories to go in every group, so there's just a lot of repetition.
Such a small amount of what.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna take Carol's or Joe. Carol, Joe, and then and then we're gonna part for lunch.
Something that you said, Andrea, about how the term riot. I grew up in Detroit, and I was alive and about 10 years old when that happened. And later, I met a young man who was 18 at the time. He was black. He's dead now, but anyway, he said that he was terrified at that time, and he was being chased by a bunch of white guys. And he said he ran to a police officer, and he said, "These guys are chasing me, help me." He said the police officer said, "You better run, boy." And so the whole power of the state is turned against this guy, and here he is just alone. And he said he ran like hell. I mean, I guess he did get away from him, but that's heavy.
Yeah.
I think one thing with the change of social media and our ability to get in touch with one another has diffused just a knee-jerk reaction of rioting. I think what we saw in Ferguson is they almost enabled a riot to happen by positioning the police and rage. And I think they needed that construct because if people are just organized and peaceful, it doesn't fit their scenario for how they like to keep control. So I think it's just a credit to all the organizing that has gone on from Trayvon on Dream Defenders or whatever, that people are looking for another way.
and I don't want to be in this room condemning rioting, right? MLK was just like, I'm not going to throw anything through the window, but I understand your anger if that is what happened. And like, you know, MLK Day was the other day, and he said, what did he say? Like, rioting is the voice of the unheard. He was like, I cannot go into these communities and look at these young folks and condemn them, because there's no other way for them to express themselves and the violence that they face and all the things that they go through. So it's like, it's not my personal choice. I'm not going to throw shit through the window. I mean, if the revolution happens, then maybe. But like, that's not where I'm at right now. But I do not want to. And you know, think about why. Think about why there's such an attitude towards rioting, because it's destruction of property. But so fucking what? You know, like that's just you have to think about the ideas that you have, where they come from, and why you're conditioned by them. You know, sagging pants. Why is that a bad thing? Who says that's a bad thing? Like, just these little things. Like, you have to question where your ideas about this stuff comes from. Like, you can still sit at a desk and type if you have baggy pants. You can, you know, just I want to condition everybody. But okay, so I think that's it. We're gonna